All right, today we're going to break down a huge strategic failure. We're talking about the fictional 2026 Iran war. We're going to look at how a war that was supposed to be limited, planned to be quick and decisive, just completely spiraled into this unwinnable mess. So, let's get right into it.
I mean, just look at this headline. This is where things ended up only 7 days ago. It just perfectly captures this massive gap, right? The intention versus the reality. They wanted to show power, but what they got was, well, an epic fail. That says it all.
So that really sets up the central question we're tackling here. How on earth did this happen? How does a military plan designed to be so contained, so controlled, just completely fall apart? We're going to walk through the missteps one by one.
Okay, so first up, a massive, epic miscalculation. And this really gets to the core of it, a complete misunderstanding of the other side. This wasn't some small mistake, This was a flaw baked into the very foundation of the whole plan. So, check this out. This slide really lays the flawed thinking bare. You've got the assumption on one side and the reality on the other. Planners were banking on Iran being this fragile state that would just crumble under pressure. They thought, okay, a few strikes will scare them off. Maybe the whole regime will collapse from the inside. But what actually happened? The exact opposite. The attack didn't break them apart. It actually brought them together against the common enemy. And that's such a crucial takeaway, right? Misjudging your opponent's will to fight can be way more dangerous than missing a piece of intel.
And this was the first move based on that bad assumption. Operation Lion's Roar, February 28, 2026. This was supposed to be the big show of force. A bunch of coordinated airstrikes to scare Tehran into backing down. But instead of being coerced, they hit back. And they hit back hard, with a massive counterattack that the planners just did not see coming.
Yeah, and a huge reason they were caught off guard was this serious underestimation of Iran's military. The thinking was their defenses would be easy to neutralize, their missiles couldn't reach that far, but they were wrong. The missiles did have the reach. And what was really shocking is that some of them actually got through Israel's advanced air defenses. So the retaliation wasn't just a little bigger than expected, it was on a scale that planners thought was basically impossible. It's a tough lesson. You have to plan for the worst-case scenario, not just the one you hope for.
All right, that leads us right into the next major problem. Let's call it the illusion of control. This is all about the seriously dangerous idea that you could somehow keep a war like this small, tidy, and contained. So the whole strategy hinged on this one theory, controlled escalation. Sounds fancy, right? But all it really means is the belief that you can dial a conflict up or down, like a thermostat. Hit them just enough to get your way, but not so hard that it turns into a full-blown war. The problem is, your opponent gets a vote. It's like playing chess and thinking you've got them in check, but you don't realize they're about to flip the whole board over. It's a concept that sounds great in a briefing room, but in reality, it almost never works out that way. And this shows you exactly how that illusion shattered. It was supposed to be just step one, some precision strikes. But that didn't end things. It started a domino effect. Iran hits back directly. Then their proxy forces all over the region get activated. And before you know it, global shipping is getting massively disrupted. The war didn't stay in its neat little box. It just blew up across the entire region. It's a perfect example of how the idea of a clean war is pretty much a fantasy. Really, the root of this was just overconfidence. The planners truly believed their first strikes would be so crippling that Iran wouldn't even be able to respond in a meaningful way. What they missed was that Iran's military assets weren't all in one place. They were dispersed, they had reserves, and that meant they could take that first hit and still come back swinging. Okay, so no war ever happens in a vacuum, right? And that brings us to the third major flaw in the plan, ignoring the ripple effect. They just didn't seem to account for all the knock-on effects, geopolitically, economically, you name it. This table just lays it out so clearly. Look at how these miscalculations cascaded. They thought their allies in the Gulf would just sit quietly on the sidelines. Nope. Those countries immediately started looking for other partners to protect themselves. They thought the world would say, oh yeah, this is justified. Instead, there was widespread condemnation for violating the UN Charter. And the economy? They figured the markets would just sort of absorb it. But when you disrupt the oil trade, you get chaos. And that's exactly what happened.
And those ripples didn't just stop at the border. They came right back home. You know that classic idea of rallying around the flag in wartime? Well, that didn't happen. In the U.S., public support just tanked as the real costs became clear. And instead of creating unity, the war actually made political divisions even worse.
So let's pull this all together. When you look back at all these pieces, what's the final anatomy of this failure? What are the big takeaways?
And this might be the single biggest flaw of all. They went into this thing without a clear endgame. There was no real answer to the question, so how does this end? What does winning even look like? Without a clear exit strategy, you don't have an off-ramp, and you risk getting stuck in exactly what happened here, a long, messy, unwinnable war.
This quote really just sums it all up perfectly, doesn't it? The strategic assumptions were just wrong. The whole thing was built on underestimating their adversary's resolve. At the end of the day, it was a failure that came from thinking military force could easily solve a deeply complex political problem.
And all of this leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. In a world that's as connected as ours is now, economically, politically, everything, is it even possible for a war to be limited anymore? Or is that whole concept just a dangerous fantasy? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for watching.